The luminous spires of Astrohaven, a sprawling space station, pierced the absolute darkness of the cosmos, bathing the vibrant commercial sector in an otherworldly radiance. Jax Corvus emerged from the Serpent's Coil Cantina, his obsidian stealth armor consuming the surrounding light like a living shadow. The removal of his helmet and gauntlets revealed a strikingly handsome visage, framed by a meticulously groomed beard and neatly arranged brown hair. He inhaled deeply, savoring the artificially generated calm of the station following yet another victorious mission as an independent security operative. He had cultivated a considerable reputation in this region of space, though the financial rewards were modest. However, it afforded him a livelihood and, more crucially, kept him removed from the suffocating bureaucracy of Terra. The relative tranquility shattered abruptly with the echoing discharge of plasma weaponry and a feminine shriek emanating from a nearby alleyway. Jax instinctively reached for his laser pistol, sprinting towards the source of the disturbance, his combat-honed musculature reacting with fluid precision. The scene that unfolded before him ignited his fury. 3 armed thugs had cornered what appeared to be a noble-born alien female, her argent skin seeming to shimmer in the dim illumination, a striking contrast to her flowing alabaster tresses. She was adorned in an elaborate brown pelt draped over a form-fitting battlesuit that revealed enough to suggest significant social standing. "Last chance, Your Grace," one of the thugs snarled, his weapon leveled at her chest. "Lord Forlag sends his regards and suggests you reconsider his generous offer." The woman's response was as elegant as it was defiant. "Relay to that posturing fool that House Astrea does not yield to threats from lesser houses." Her voice carried the unmistakable inflection of the celestial elite, a sound that typically grated on Jax's nerves, yet there was something unique about her, a burning intensity that spoke of more than just inherited privilege. "Then I suppose we'll have to make an example." The thug's threat was abruptly cut short by a precisely aimed laser bolt that struck his weapon, sending it clattering to the ground in a shower of sparks. 3 armed men against 1 woman? Jax called out, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "That's hardly sporting, gentlemen." The thugs whirled around, their weapons tracking towards this new threat. Jax was already in motion, utilizing the shadows and his dark armor to his advantage. Another shot from his laser pistol found its mark, dropping a second assailant with a smoking wound in his shoulder. "Human scum!" the 3rd thug snarled, unleashing a barrage of plasma fire that forced Jax to take cover behind a waste disposal unit. In the ensuing chaos, the 1st thug recovered his weapon and took aim at the alien woman. She attempted to evade, but the plasma bolt grazed her leg, eliciting a cry of pain as she collapsed. Jax's jaw clenched. These bastards had just made it personal. He rolled out from cover, firing 3 rapid shots. The first 2 forced the thugs to scatter, while the 3rd struck the leader squarely in the chest, dropping him like a stone. The remaining thug glanced at his fallen companions and fled into the darkness of the station's lower levels. Jax kept his weapon trained on the alley entrance for several seconds before holstering it and rushing to the wounded woman's side. "Don't move," he commanded, already assessing the severity of the plasma burn on her leg. "I need to stop the bleeding." "How dare you presume to," she began, but her words dissolved into a hiss of pain as he examined the wound. Jax ignored her protest, sprinting to a nearby medical supply dispenser. He swiped his cred chip against the reader and grabbed a standard emergency kit. When he returned, the woman's argent skin had taken on an alarming pallor. "This is going to hurt," he warned, pulling out antiseptic and synthetic skin sealant. The wound was severe, plasma burns always were, and part of her elaborate outfit was fused to the injury. He'd have to cut away the fabric to treat it properly. "You will not touch me, human," she managed through gritted teeth, trying to push herself away despite the obvious agony. "I am Lady Lyra of House Astrea, and you have no right to." "Lady," Jax interrupted, already cutting through the expensive material with medical shears, "you can either let me save your leg, or you can keep your dignity and probably bleed out. Your choice." Her eyes widened in outrage, but before she could respond, the blood loss finally took its toll. Her eyes rolled back, and she slumped unconscious against the alley wall. "That's what I thought," Jax muttered, working quickly to clean and seal the wound. As he applied the synthetic skin, he couldn't help but notice that despite her aristocratic airs, there was something compelling about her. Maybe it was the way she'd stood up to her attackers, or perhaps it was just the way the station lights played across her silvery skin. Either way, he couldn't leave her here. After ensuring the wound was properly dressed, he gathered her unconscious form in his arms. His modest quarters weren't far, and while they were hardly up to aristocratic standards, they were safe. Besides, he had questions about these attackers, and he was pretty sure she'd want answers too. As he carried her through the less-traveled maintenance corridors, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter was going to complicate his life in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. Lady Lyra's first sensation upon regaining consciousness was the unfamiliar texture of rough synthetic fabric against her argent skin. Her eyes snapped open, taking in surroundings that made her aristocratic sensibilities recoil in horror. The room was small, utilitarian, and distinctly human. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Your Grace," a deep voice drawled from somewhere to her left. She turned her head to find her rescuer seated in a worn chair, cleaning his laser pistol with practiced efficiency. In the harsh overhead lighting, she could better appreciate the strong lines of his face and the intelligence in his eyes, not that she'd ever admit to noticing such things about a human. "Where have you brought me?" she demanded, attempting to sit up. A sharp pain in her leg quickly reminded her of recent events. "My humble abode," he replied, setting aside his weapon. "Though I'm sure it's several steps down from your usual accommodations." I'm Jax Corvus, by the way. Since we've already gotten to the point where I've carried you unconscious through the station, we might as well be properly introduced."
Lyra silver heeks flushed a depa shedde of metallis grey. Eucaritem e trug public corridors.
"Would you have preferred I left you bleeding in the alley?" His tone was maddeningly reasonable.
"Besides, I stuck to meinten angse passages."
"Your reputation is intact." She glanced down at her leg, noting the professional application of synthetic skin and healing compounds. The ruined portion of her outfit had been carefully cut away, but he'd maintained her modesty by draping a clean thermal blanket over her. "You seem competent," she admitted grudgingly, "for a human." Jax's laugh was unexpected, rich and genuine. "High praise indeed from House Astria. Though I'm more interested in why someone was trying to kill you. Those weren't common thugs." Lyra stiffened. "That's none of your concern." "It became my concern when I had to patch up a plasma burn in my favorite alley," he leaned forward, and she found herself caught by the intensity of his gaze. "Those men mentioned Lord Forlag. Last I heard, House Forlag was pushing for stronger trade relations with the Human Systems Alliance." "You're remarkably well informed for a common mercenary," she observed, trying to ignore how his presence seemed to fill the small room. "I prefer security specialist," he corrected with a hint of a smile, "and in my line of work, information keeps you alive." Speaking of which, he stood and retrieved a steaming cup from a nearby dispenser. This should help with the blood loss. The aroma that reached her was surprisingly pleasant. "You have celestial tea?" "I keep some for special occasions, like when noble-born ladies get shot in my vicinity," he offered her the cup, and she accepted it with only slight hesitation. Their fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected tingle through her hand. "Thank you," she murmured, taking a sip to hide her confusion. The tea was perfectly prepared, at exactly the right temperature, another surprise. "Now," Jax said, settling back in his chair, "want to tell me what's really going on? Because those men weren't trying to kill you. They were trying to send a message. The question is, to whom?" Lyra studied him over the rim of her cup. By all rights, she should be demanding transport to her family's quarters, not sitting here having tea with a human mercenary. But something about his direct approach was refreshing. After a lifetime of courtly intrigue and careful words, his straightforwardness was almost intoxicating. "House Forlag," she began slowly, "has been pressuring my family to support their trade initiatives. They claim closer ties with humanity would benefit all houses. My father disagrees." "And you," he paused, realizing she'd never actually been asked her opinion before. "I believe House Forlag's true motives are less than altruistic. They seek to monopolize human trade routes, using our house's influence to bypass traditional protocols." Jax nodded. "And tonight's message was meant to encourage your father to reconsider his position?"
"Precisely."
She set down her empty cup, surprised to find her hands trembling slightly. "Though I suspect there's more to it. Forlag has never been this aggressive in their negotiations." "They're desperate," Jax said, his expression thoughtful. "The Human Systems Alliance is opening new trade routes through the Carina sector. Whoever brokers those deals stands to make a fortune." "How do you know all this?" She shrugged, a fluid motion that drew her attention to his broad shoulders. "Like I said, information keeps you alive. Plus, I might have done some work for the Alliance in the past. You're more than just a common mercenary, aren't you? She found herself leaning forward despite herself, intrigued. And you're more than just a pretty face in a fancy coat, he countered with a grin that sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. Lyra felt her face flush again, but this time it wasn't from embarrassment. The way he looked at her, like he was seeing past her title to the person beneath, was both unnerving and exhilarating. I should contact my family, she said, trying to regain her composure. They'll be wondering where I am. Probably not the best idea right now, Jax cautioned. If Forlag has infiltrated station security, which they almost certainly have, any communication could be traced. You need to lay low until we figure out their next move. We? She arched an eyebrow. I don't recall hiring you, Mr. Corvus. Consider it a professional courtesy, his smile turned predatory. Besides, I'm curious to see how this plays out. It's not every day I get to unravel a conspiracy with a noble-born lady. You are the most presumptuous human I've ever met, she declared, but there was no real heat in her words. I'll take that as a compliment. He stood and stretched, and Lyra found herself tracking the movement with entirely too much interest. You should rest. That leg needs time to heal, and tomorrow we can start figuring out just how deep this rabbit hole goes. I don't know what a rabbit is, she muttered, but I suppose I have little choice but to trust you for now. That's the spirit, Your Grace. He headed for the door. I'll take the couch. Try not to plot my demise in your sleep. No promises, she called after him, surprising herself with the playful tone in her voice. As the door slid shut behind him, Lyra lay back on the bed, her mind whirling. This was madness. She was a daughter of House Astrea, one of the most powerful families in the celestial elite. She shouldn't be hiding in a human's quarters, drinking his tea, and most certainly shouldn't be noticing how his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Yet here she was, and the most disturbing part was how right it felt. There was something about Jax Corvus that made her feel more alive than she had in years of courtly functions and political maneuvering. He treated her like a person, not a title, and that was both terrifying and thrilling. As she drifted off to sleep, she found herself wondering what other surprises this impossible human had in store for her, and why the thought made her smile. Jax's personal datapad chirped with an urgent alert just before dawn, station time. He scanned the encrypted message, his jaw tightening at its contents. House Forlag hadn't wasted any time. They'd already begun systematically searching the lower levels of the station. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Years of training had him reaching for his weapon before recognizing the distinctive pattern. 3 quick taps, followed by 2 slow ones. The door slid open to reveal Tyran, an aging servant of House Astrea whose loyalty to Lyra apparently outweighed his distaste for humans. Master Corvus, Tyran whispered, his crystalline eyes darting nervously down the corridor, I bring urgent news. Jax ushered him inside, noting the servant's disheveled appearance, unusual for a member of such a prestigious household. What's happened? House Forlag has made their move. Openly now. They filed a formal complaint with the station council, claiming Lady Lyra has been kidnapped by human insurgents. Tyrann's voice trembled with barely contained anger. They're using it as leverage to push through their trade agreements, claiming that without proper aristocratic oversight, humans cannot be trusted. Clever bastards, Jax muttered. He glanced toward his bedroom, where Lyra still slept. They're playing both angles. Either they find her and force her family's compliance, or they use her disappearance to achieve the same goal. There's more, Tyran added, pulling a small data crystal from his robes. I managed to access Lord Forlag's private communications. The trade agreements are merely a cover for something far more sinister. They're planning to. A distant explosion rocked the station, cutting off Tyrann's words. Emergency klaxons began blaring throughout the sector. They're here. Tyran gasped. They must have tracked me. The bedroom door slid open, revealing Lyra in one of Jax's spare shirts, her argent skin seeming to glow in the emergency lighting. Despite the situation, Jax found himself momentarily transfixed by the sight. Tyran, she exclaimed. What are you? No time, Jax interrupted, already moving to gather essential supplies. Station security's been compromised, and we need to move now. But my leg. We'll have to manage. He tossed her a pair of boots and a stealth suit from his spare gear. Unless you prefer to explain to Lord Forlag why you're in a human's quarters wearing his clothes. A fascinating shade of gray colored her cheeks as she caught the clothing. Turn around, both of you, she commanded, though Jax noticed her eyes lingering on him a moment longer than necessary. As they waited, Tyran handed Jax the data crystal. Everything I found is here. But be careful. Some of the information it suggests connections that go far beyond House Forlag. The trade agreements are connected to something called Project Chimera. The sound of boots in the corridor cut their conversation short. Jax checked his weapons while trying very hard not to think about Lyra changing behind him. Ready, she announced, and he turned to find her looking surprisingly natural in his stealth suit. The sight stirred something primal in him that he quickly suppressed. There's a maintenance shaft behind the environmental unit, he explained, already moving to the hidden panel. It'll take us down to the sublevels. Tyran, you should. I must return to the house, the servant interrupted. My absence will soon be noticed, and I can better serve by monitoring the situation from within. Lyra grabbed the old servant's hands. Thank you, my friend. Be careful. You as well, my lady. Tyran's eyes flicked between her and Jax. Perhaps this situation is not entirely unfortunate. Your father always did say you had your mother's taste for adventure. Before Lyra could respond, another explosion rocked the station, closer this time. Jax pulled the panel free, revealing a narrow shaft barely wide enough for one person. Ladies first, he gestured, trying to lighten the moment. Lyra approached the opening, then hesitated. This isn't exactly. Just think of it as a very exclusive escape route, Jax suggested, earning a glare that somehow managed to be both annoyed and amused. As she climbed into the shaft, Jax couldn't help but admire her grace even in such an undignified situation. She caught him looking and raised an eyebrow. Enjoying the view, Mr. Corvus? Just ensuring your safe descent, your grace, he replied with a grin that made her cheeks darken again. The sound of breaking glass from the corridor spurred them into action. Tyran slipped away as Jax followed Lyra into the shaft, pulling the panel closed behind them. They descended in tense silence, the only sound their breathing and the distant chaos above. The maintenance shaft opened into a rarely used cargo level filled with abandoned shipping containers and forgotten machinery. Jax helped Lyra out of the shaft, trying to ignore how right she felt in his arms, or how she seemed to lean into his touch despite her earlier protests about human contact. We should be safe here for a moment, he whispered, scanning the shadows with practiced ease. How's the leg? Functional, she replied, though he noticed her slight wince. The synthetic skin is holding, but I wouldn't want to run a marathon. Hopefully, it won't come to that. He pulled out his data pad to check the station schematics. There's an old emergency bunker 2 sectors over. We can lay low there while we figure out what's on this crystal. Lyra moved closer, ostensibly to see the screen. Her proximity sent his pulse racing in a way that had nothing to do with their current danger. You seem very familiar with the station's less reputable areas, she observed. Part of the job, he murmured, acutely aware of how her breath tickled his neck. Though I usually don't have such elegant company. She turned to face him, their bodies mere inches apart. You have a strange effect on me, Jax Corvus, she admitted softly. Everything I've been taught says I should be repulsed by you, yet. Yet, he prompted, his voice rougher than intended. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities. Jax found himself drawn to her like a star caught in a gravitational well, all his careful professional distance evaporating in the heat of her gaze. A distant door clanged, breaking the spell. They sprang apart as voices echoed through the cargo level. We should move, Jax said, trying to focus on survival rather than the lingering warmth where she'd been standing. Lyra nodded, but her eyes held a promise that made his heart race. Lead the way, Mr. Corvus. It seems I'm developing quite a taste for following you into dangerous situations. They moved through the shadows like ghosts, Jax leading them through a maze of containers and machinery. Each time they had to stop and hide, they found themselves pressed closer together, their bodies fitting together with an ease that seemed to transcend their different species. As they reached the entrance to the next sector, Lyra grabbed his arm. Whatever happens, she whispered, I'm glad it was you who found me in that alley. Jax looked down at her, seeing past the aristocratic facade to the remarkable woman beneath. So am I, Your Grace. So am I. They made their way through the dimly lit corridors of the lower sector, the distant sounds of pursuit adding urgency to their movements. Jax kept them to the shadows, his hand occasionally brushing Lyra's lower back to guide her. Each touch sent electricity through both of them, the tension building with every passing moment. "Wait," Lyra whispered suddenly, pulling him into an alcove. Her body pressed against his as a security patrol passed nearby, their boots echoing on the metal deck plates. "You're getting better at this," Jax murmured in her ear, trying to ignore how perfectly she fit against him. "I had an excellent teacher," she replied, her breath warm against his neck, "though I never imagined I'd be skulking through maintenance tunnels in stolen clothes." "Borrowed clothes," he corrected with a smirk. "They look better on you anyway." She pulled back slightly to meet his eyes, her expression a mix of amusement and something deeper. "You're not what I expected, Jax Corvus." "And what did you expect from a common human mercenary? You know very well you're anything but common." Her hand rested on his chest, and he wondered if she could feel his heart racing beneath her palm. The moment was interrupted by his data pad vibrating. Jax checked it while maintaining their protective embrace, more for pleasure now than necessity. "Tyran sent an update," he reported, scanning the message. "House Forlag's forces are concentrating on the upper levels, but they've got eyes on all the main transportation hubs. They're expecting us to try leaving the station." "But you have other plans," Lyra stated, not asked. She'd already learned to read him surprisingly well. "The emergency bunker I mentioned. It's actually an old smuggler cache, complete with a private dock and a small ship." Her eyes widened. "You continue to surprise me, though I suppose I shouldn't be shocked that you consort with smugglers. Says the noble-born lady currently hiding in the station's underbelly," he teased, earning another of those fascinating blushes. They moved on, making their way through increasingly abandoned sections of the station. The air grew staler, the lighting more sporadic. Lyra stumbled once when her injured leg caught on some debris, but Jax caught her before she could fall. "I've got you," he assured her, his arms around her waist. She didn't immediately pull away. "Yes," she said softly, "you do." The bunker entrance was hidden behind a false maintenance panel, requiring Jax to input a complex series of codes. As the door slid open, revealing a surprisingly well-appointed safe room, Lyra gasped. "This is not what I was expecting," she admitted, taking in the comfortable furnishings and modern amenities. "Smugglers appreciate their comforts," Jax explained, securing the door behind them, "and some of us occasionally need a place to disappear for a while." He moved to the computer terminal, inserting Tyran's data crystal as the files began decrypting. Lyra explored the space, running her fingers along the various surfaces with aristocratic appraisal. "Not quite up to House Astria's standards," she mused, "but considerably better than your quarters." "You wound me, Your Grace." "Lyra," she corrected, turning to face him. "After everything that's happened, I think you've earned the right to use my name." The way she said it made it sound like more than just permission to use her given name. Jax looked up from the terminal, caught by the intensity of her gaze. "Lyra," he tested the name, enjoying how it felt on his tongue. "Beautiful name for a beautiful woman." "Such charm," she teased, moving closer. "Do you practice these lines, or do they come naturally?" "Nothing about my reactions to you has been practiced," he admitted, standing to meet her approach. They stood facing each other, the air between them charged with possibility. All the tension, the forbidden attraction, the growing connection of the past days seemed to crystallize in this moment. "You know this changes everything," she whispered, her hand coming up to trace the line of his jaw. "A daughter of House Astria and a human. Are you having regrets?" He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "About you? No." Her free hand fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. "About not letting you touch me sooner? Perhaps." The computer chimed, indicating the decryption was complete, but neither of them moved. They stood suspended in the moment, years of prejudice and protocol dissolving in the heat between them. "We should check those files," Jax said, his voice rough with restraint. "We should," Lyra agreed, making no move to step away. "They could contain crucial information about the conspiracy against my family. Lives could be at stake." "Indeed." Her eyes dropped to his lips. "So many important things we should be doing." The computer chimed again, more insistently this time, finally breaking the spell between them. Jax reluctantly stepped back, though Lyra's hand lingered on his chest for a moment longer. "Duty calls," he said with a rueful smile, turning to the terminal. As he began scanning through the decrypted files, Lyra moved to stand behind him, one hand resting on his shoulder. The casual intimacy of the gesture wasn't lost on either of them. "By the stars," she breathed as the information scrolled across the screen. "Project Chimera isn't just about trade routes. They're planning to rewrite the entire power structure of the celestial elite," Jax finished grimly, "using human technology as leverage." The files revealed a complex web of corruption and manipulation. House Forlag had discovered something in restricted alliance space, an ancient terraforming technology far beyond current capabilities. They believed it could be modified to alter the fundamental biological structure of living beings. Biological structure. Lyra's hand went unconsciously to her stomach, and Jax felt a sudden, inexplicable surge of protectiveness. "They want to force evolution," Tyran explained, "create a perfect aristocracy by combining what they see as the best traits of various species, including human adaptability. That's why they needed House Astria's influence. Your house controls the medical research facilities in this sector, and my cousin has given them access to our genetic databases." Lyra's voice was tight with anger. "Generations of aristocratic bloodlines." A sudden alert flashed across Jax's screens. "Speaking of your cousin, he's just arrived at the grand convocation ahead of schedule, and he's brought guests." The footage showed Lord Tyran greeting representatives from House Forlag, their body language suggesting intimate familiarity. But it was the other figures that caught Jax's attention, heavily armed mercenaries wearing familiar insignia. "Black Sun Brigade," he growled. "I should have known they'd be involved." "Friends of yours?" Lyra asked, arching an elegant eyebrow. "More like persistent admirers. They've been trying to recruit me for years." He turned to Tyran. "How long until they're ready to move?" "The convocation begins in 36 hours. If they're going to make their play, it'll be during the opening ceremony, when all house leaders are present." Lyra stood abruptly, swaying again. This time Jax was quick enough to catch her before she stumbled. The contact sent electricity arcing between them, and for a moment the rest of the universe seemed to fade away. "You need rest," he insisted softly, still holding her close. "We don't have time." "Actually," Tyran interrupted, her keen eyes missing nothing, "you both need rest. I have preparations to make, and my quarters are at your disposal. We'll reconvene in 6 hours." As they followed Tyran's directions through the station's corridors, Jax kept his hand at Lyra's lower back, ostensibly to steady her. They both knew it was more than that. The quarters were simple but comfortable, with a viewport offering a stunning view of the asteroid field. As soon as the door closed behind them, the atmosphere changed, charged with weeks of building tension and unspoken desires. "Jax," Lyra began, turning to face him, her silver eyes seeming to glow in the starlight, "these past days. Everything I thought I knew about humans, about myself." He stepped closer, drawn by the vulnerability in her voice. "Having second thoughts about slumming it with a mere human?" "No," she whispered, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "Having thoughts about how blind I was, how much time I wasted being outraged by your touch when all I want now is—" The rest of her words were lost as their lips finally met. The kiss was like a supernova, explosive yet tender, breaking down the last barriers between them. Their differences melted away, replaced by a profound connection that transcended species and status. What followed was a discovery of each other that went beyond physical intimacy, a sharing of souls that would have profound consequences neither could have anticipated. In the aftermath, as they lay tangled together watching the stars whirl past the viewport, Lyra traced patterns on his chest. "I never understood before," she murmured, "why some of our ancient texts spoke of humans with such fascination. Now I do. You're magnificent." Jax kissed her temple, marveling at how right this felt.
"You're not about yourself, Your Grace."
She laughed, a sound of pure joy that made his heart swell. "I think we're well past titles now, don't you?" Before he could respond, Tyran's voice came over the comm. "Sorry to interrupt, but we have a problem. Lord Tyran's people are on the move, and they're heading this way. We need to go now." They sprang into action, years of respective training taking over as they hurriedly dressed and gathered their weapons. Lyra suddenly stopped, her hand going to her stomach again. "Jax," she said softly, her expression a mix of wonder and uncertainty, "there's something you should know. My people are highly attuned to changes in our bodies, and right now. Understanding dawned, sending a shock of emotion through him so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees.
Are you saying? Yes.
Her smile was radiant despite the danger. It seems the universe has a sense of humor. The noble-born lady who once couldn't bear a human's touch is now carrying his child. The moment was interrupted by the sound of distant explosions.
Reality crashed back in.
They were still in danger, still had a conspiracy to stop, still had to save the celestial elite from itself. But as they raced to meet whatever challenges lay ahead, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same. The touch she had once found so offensive had led to a love that would change both their worlds forever. The grand convocation hall glittered like 1,000 stars, its crystalline architecture reflecting the light of 3 setting suns. Representatives from every major house had gathered for the ceremony that would reshape the future of the celestial elite, though not in the way House Forlag had planned. Jax adjusted his formal alliance uniform, a concession to protocol that Lyra had insisted upon. I still feel like I'm wearing a target, he muttered.
You look magnificent, she whispered back, resplendent in her Haus Astrea regalia.
Her silver skin seemed to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with the setting suns and everything to do with their growing secret. Besides, your presence here makes a statement. That's what I'm afraid of. Commander Tyrann's voice came through their concealed communicators. Security teams are in position. Lord Tyrann's people are moving exactly as predicted. Jax watched as Lyra's cousin made his way through the crowd, flanked by House Forlag representatives. The stolen genetic database was undoubtedly hidden somewhere in the ceremonial chambers, ready to be integrated with the ancient terraforming technology. Remember, Tyrann continued, we need proof of their intentions before we can act.
The Alliance won't intervene without concrete evidence.
Lyra squeezed Jax's hand. Then let's give them what they need. They moved through the gathering with practiced ease, the warrior and his princess, though anyone watching closely might wonder who was really protecting whom. Lyra's presence commanded attention, while Jax's obvious humanity drew curious stares. Lord Tyrann's face when he spotted them was worth every moment of discomfort. Cousin, he managed, his crystalline eyes widening, we feared you had been compromised. Oh, I've been compromised thoroughly, Lyra replied with a smile that made Jax's heart race, though not in the way you imagine. Before Tyrann could respond, the ceremony began. The hall's central platform rose, carrying the house leaders to their traditional positions. Lyra's father, Lord Astrea, stood proud among them, though his eyes kept darting to his daughter and her human companion. Now, Tyrann's voice commanded. Jax activated the device hidden in his ceremonial sash, a quantum scanner designed to detect the unique signature of the terraforming technology. Almost immediately, it began pulsing. Got it, he subvocalized. Lower level, directly beneath the platform. Lyra was already moving, her grace masking the deadly purpose in every step.
Cousin, won't you give me a tour of the lower chambers? For old times' sake. Tyrann hesitated, trapped by protocol and suspicion.
This isn't the time. Actually, Jax interrupted, I think this is exactly the time. He gestured subtly, and Alliance security teams began moving into position around the chamber. What followed was a masterpiece of coordination. As Tyrann realized he was trapped, he made a desperate grab for Lyra, but she was ready. Her recent combat training was showing as she smoothly redirected his momentum, sending him stumbling into a group of startled aristocrats. The House Forlag representatives moved to intervene, only to find themselves facing the business end of Jax's concealed weapons. I wouldn't, he advised pleasantly. Alliance intelligence tends to shoot first when it comes to unauthorized genetic manipulation technology.
The commotion drew the attention of the guarded houses. Lord Astrea's voice cut through the chaos. What is the meaning of this?
Perhaps I can explain, Father. Lyra projected her voice with generations of aristocratic training. My cousin, in collaboration with House Forlag, has been planning to use forbidden technology to forcibly alter our species. They intended to use today's ceremony as cover for their experiments. Commander Tyrann chose that moment to enter with her teams, carrying the evidence recovered from the lower chambers, the genetic database, the terraforming technology, and most damning of all, test results showing the horrific effects of their early attempts. The hall erupted in outrage. House leaders demanded explanations. Security forces moved to secure the conspirators. And through it all, Jax kept his position at Lyra's side. Lord Astrea descended from the platform, his expression unreadable as he approached his daughter. "You have proof of these accusations?"
Yes, Vater.
Lyra stood tall, her hand finding Jax's. "And more than that, I have proof that humanity is not our enemy but potentially our greatest ally." Her father's eyes moved to their clasped hands, then to Jax's face. "So I see."
A slicht smile tuchet his lips.
Perhaps it's time for the celestial elite to evolve, though not in the way House Forlag intended. The aftermath was a whirlwind of declarations, arrests, and diplomatic negotiations. The Alliance's role in preventing the conspiracy earned humanity a new respect among the houses, and when Lord Astrea formally announced his daughter's choice of consort, the objections were far fewer than anyone had expected. Later, in the private chambers reserved for House Astrea, Lyra and Jax finally had a moment alone. She immediately melted into his embrace, all aristocratic poise forgotten. "I still can't believe we did it," she murmured against his chest. "I still can't believe your father accepted us so easily."
Schelauket, the sound pure joy.
"He said he knew something had changed the moment he saw me. Apparently, I'm glowing in a way that has nothing to do with our species' normal bioluminescence." Jax placed his hand over her stomach, marveling at the miracle growing within. "Are you sure you're ready for this? All of this? Ready to scandalize the aristocracy by taking a human consort and bearing his child?" She kissed him softly. "My love, I've never been more ready for anything in my life." The way she said "my love" still sent shivers through him. "You've come a long way from the princess who was outraged by my touch."
And now he can't imagine going à de vitutite.
Her eyes sparkled with mischief. In fact, their passionate embrace was interrupted by a discreet cough. Tyron stood in the doorway, his expression both amused and apologetic.
"My lady, my lord, the celebration feast awaits."
As they followed the faithful servant, Jax reflected on how much had changed since that night in the alley. One touch, one moment of crisis, had led to a love that would reshape not just their lives but the future of human aristocratic relations. 1 year later, the private gardens of House Astrea echoed with laughter as little Prince Lien took his first stumbling steps. His silver skin gleamed in the sunlight, while his father's brown hair fell in waves around a face that somehow perfectly blended human and aristocratic features. Lyra watched from her favorite bench as Jax scooped up their son, tossing him high enough to make her heart skip before catching him safe. Lien's delighted squeals drew the attention of passing servants, who smiled indulgently at the former human mercenary who had become one of their most beloved lords.
"Still no regrets?"
Jax asked, joining her with their son cradled against his chest.
"Only that he wasted so much time buying prut and foolish."
She leaned into him, their bodies fitting together as perfectly as they had that first night. "Though perhaps we needed that journey to appreciate where we are now." "And where is that, exactly?"
"Right where we belong."
She kissed him deeply, ignoring the mock-scandalized gasps of passing aristocrats. Lien chose that moment to grab a fistful of his father's beard, reminding them both that their greatest adventure was just beginning. The touch that had once caused such outrage had led to a love that would echo through generations, proving that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages. As the three suns set over the capital, casting the gardens in ethereal light, Lyra watched her human husband playing with her half-human son and smiled. The universe, it seemed, had a wonderful sense of humor and an even better sense of destiny.